Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, May 26th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, we are expecting a high of 70.5 degrees and a low of 63.7 degrees. It looks like a mild and pleasant day for the area. Coming up on the program, we are taking a closer look at the Texas Senate runoff and why it has turned into such a historic power struggle for the Republican Party. We will also investigate the recent surge in violent attacks and how that has ignited a fresh debate over the necessity of a new bunker at the White House. Beyond those major stories, we have a selection of other important headlines to keep you informed. All of this and more on today's episode of Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. Today is May 26th, 2026, and Texas voters are heading to the polls for what may be the most expensive and bitter Republican Senate runoff this state has ever seen. It pits four-term incumbent John Cornyn against State Attorney General Ken Paxton, and it's already shaking up the national political landscape. Joining us to break it all down is our political reporter, Ethan. Ethan, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. Yeah, this race has really become a national story, even though it's technically a state primary runoff. The reason is simple. It's being treated as a proxy battle between the old Republican establishment and the MAGA populist wing. And the stakes go well beyond Texas. Whichever side wins tonight, the message will ripple through the entire party heading into the fall.
So let's start with the basics. How did we even get to a runoff between these two?
Well, back on the March 3rd primary, Cornyn finished on top, but just barely. He took 42% to Paxton's 40.5%. Because no one cleared 50%, Texas law forced a head-to-head runoff between the top two finishers. And what's remarkable is how the dynamic has shifted since then. A May 5th poll, just 3 weeks ago, showed Paxton actually leading 48 to 45.
That's a real reversal. How unusual is it for a sitting senator to be in this kind of trouble?
Historically, it's unheard of in Texas. No sitting Republican U.S. senator from this state has ever lost a primary bid. Not once. So if Paxton pulls this off tonight, we are watching political history in real time. Cornyn has been in the Senate for 4 terms, and that kind of incumbency usually acts like a fortress. Tonight, that fortress is being seriously tested.
And I understand the spending in this race has been just staggering.
Staggering is the right word, Grace. Total advertising expenditures are estimated somewhere between $109 million and $120 million. To put that in perspective, that's more than many full general election Senate races cost. Cornyn and his allied super PACs alone poured in roughly $90 million. At one point, he was outspending Paxton 9-1 on the airwaves.
$90 million is an enormous war chest. What were Cornyn's ads actually focused on?
The strategy was very clear. Cornyn's team hammered Paxton's so-called baggage, especially his 2023 impeachment by the Texas House. They also reminded voters of the allegations of bribery involving donor Nate Paul and an extramarital affair that came out during that impeachment fight. Cornyn's argument essentially was electability. He warned that Paxton's legal troubles could put a safe Republican seat at risk in November against Democratic State Representative James Tallarico.
And yet the polls suggest that message didn't quite land the way Cornyn hoped. What changed?
A few things, but the biggest one came on May 19th, just a week ago. President Donald Trump officially endorsed Ken Paxton right as early voting began across Texas. And he didn't just offer a polite nod. Trump went after Cornyn directly, calling him, quote, very disloyal, end quote, and, quote, hopeless, end quote. He praised Paxton as a, quote, MAGA warrior, end quote.
Wow. So why does Trump dislike Cornyn so much?
Trump laid out specific grievances. He pointed to Cornyn's late support in previous election cycles. He brought up Cornyn's 2023 comment suggesting that Trump's, quote, time has passed, end quote. And he hit Cornyn for his role in the 2022 bipartisan gun safety bill, which was deeply unpopular with the Republican base. For Trump, that combination apparently added up to a senator who needed to be replaced.
And this isn't the only Republican incumbent Trump has gone after this spring, right?
That's right, Grace, and that's an important piece of context. Just earlier this month, Trump backed successful primary challenges against Republican incumbents in Louisiana, Kentucky, and Indiana. So tonight in Texas is really the capstone of a coordinated effort to reshape the Republican Senate caucus in his image. If Paxton wins, Trump will have flipped 4 sitting senators in a single cycle. That would be a remarkable demonstration of his grip on the party.
Now, on the Cornyn side, did his fundraising advantage hold up through this final stretch?
Interestingly, no. While Cornyn started the runoff outspending Paxton 9-1, that gap narrowed significantly in the final week. Once Trump's endorsement landed, Paxton's campaign saw a surge in small-dollar donations and outside PAC money. They essentially blanketed the state with ads featuring Trump's endorsement and attacks on Tallarico. So the closing argument from Paxton became, "Vote for me, and you're voting with President Trump."
What about the personal dynamic between these two? I've heard this race has gotten ugly.
It's been brutal, Grace. There's deep personal animosity between Cornyn and Paxton, and it's spilled into nearly every ad and public statement. On the final day before the runoff, which was yesterday, neither candidate held public campaign events. They focused entirely on digital and television outreach. Cornyn's final ads kept hammering the impeachment. Paxton's final ads were all about Trump and tying Cornyn to Democrats.
Let's talk about the bigger picture. Why are Senate Republican leaders in Washington watching this so closely?
Because of the math. Republicans currently hold a narrow 53-45 majority in the Senate. Party leaders worry that a Paxton victory tonight could put what should be a safe Texas seat genuinely in play this November. Cornyn would almost certainly cruise to re-election. Paxton, with his impeachment and legal issues, is a much more uncertain general election candidate. So even some Republicans who like Paxton personally are nervous about the math.
And the Democrat waiting in the wings is James Tallarico. Tell us a bit more about him.
Tallarico is a state representative who has built a strong national profile, and the fundraising numbers reflect that. He has already raised over $27 million for the general election, and that's before he even knows who his opponent will be. Democrats believe he's their best shot at a Texas Senate seat in a generation, especially if Paxton is the nominee. He's expected to lean heavily on Paxton's baggage, if it comes to that.
Are there other races on the ballot tonight that voters should be paying attention to?
Yes, there are. The runoff coincides with several key Democratic U.S. House primaries, particularly in Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. Those races will help determine the Democratic strategy for trying to flip suburban Texas seats. So while the Senate race is sucking up all the oxygen, the down-ballot results tonight could also reshape the state's congressional delegation. It's a big night across the board.
And beyond the seat itself, what does the outcome say about the identity of the Republican Party here in Texas?
That may be the most important question of all, Grace. A Paxton victory would signal the total dominance of the Trump-aligned wing over the Texas GOP. It would mean the establishment wing, the one Cornyn represents, no longer has a real foothold even in its home state. A Cornyn win, on the other hand, would suggest there are still limits to Trump's influence, and that incumbency and money still matter. Either way, tonight is a defining moment.
When do polls close, and when can voters expect to see results?
Polls close at 7 p.m. Central Time across Texas. Because so much of the vote was cast early, we should start getting a strong picture of the trend within the first hour or two after polls close. In a race this close, though, the official call could take longer, especially if it tightens into the night. Both campaigns have legal teams ready, just in case.
And one quick clarification, Ethan, just so our viewers are clear. Whoever wins tonight then faces Tallarico in November, correct?
Exactly right. Tonight only decides the Republican nominee. The general election is still months away in November, but given how Texas usually votes, this Republican runoff has often been treated as the de facto race. That assumption is exactly what makes a potential Paxton nomination so interesting, because it could actually put that assumption to the test for the first time in years.
Fascinating stuff. Ethan, thank you so much for walking us through all of this on what's shaping up to be a really historic day in Texas politics.
Happy to, Grace. We'll be watching the returns closely tonight.
That was our political reporter, Ethan. Stay with us, because we'll have much more news right after this break. We're back, and we're turning now to a story that's shaken the nation's capital. Just 3 days ago, gunfire erupted right outside the White House, leaving one suspect dead and a bystander wounded. Our reporter Chloe has been tracking every twist. Chloe, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. Yes, this all unfolded Saturday evening, May 23rd at roughly 6 p.m. Eastern at the intersection of 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest. According to ABC News, NBC News, and the U.S. Secret Service, a 21-year-old man approached a checkpoint near the Eisenhower Executive Office building. He pulled a revolver from a bag and opened fire on Secret Service uniformed division officers. It was, by all accounts, a chaotic and terrifying scene.
Chloe, walk us through what those first moments looked and sounded like on the ground.
An NBC News team that was actually on the scene reported hearing a barrage of 20 to 30 shots in rapid succession. Secret Service agents immediately rushed reporters and staff into the White House press briefing room and ordered them to take cover. The entire complex was placed on lockdown for about 50 minutes. Officers returned fire and struck the suspect, who was pronounced dead at a local hospital shortly after. President Donald Trump was inside the Oval Office at the time but was not harmed.
And we mentioned a bystander was hurt. What do we know about that person now, 3 days later?
The Washington Post and CBS News reported that an unidentified male pedestrian was struck near the 17th Street checkpoint. As of today, May 26th, he remains in serious but stable condition after undergoing surgery. NPR initially described his injuries as critical, but the Metropolitan Police Department has since clarified that they are non-life-threatening. So there's a bit of cautious optimism on that front, even as families and witnesses remain shaken.
There's a real open question, though, isn't there, about whose bullet actually hit him?
That's right, Grace, and it's a sensitive one. A ballistics investigation led by the MPD and the FBI is underway to determine whether the bystander was hit by a round from the suspect's revolver or by return fire from Secret Service officers. We're told between 15 and 30 rounds were discharged by those officers. Secret Service spokesperson Anthony Guglielmi said forensic teams are still analyzing shell casings and bullet fragments to identify the source of what he called the, quote, stray round, end quote. Until that work is done, no one's drawing conclusions publicly.
Let's talk about the suspect himself. Who was he, and how did he end up at that checkpoint?
His name was Nasir Best, 21 years old, from Dundalk, Maryland. He was a graduate of Dundalk High School, where he had been a sprinter on the track team. But his life after graduation, according to court records uncovered by WUSA 9 and WBAL-TV, took a deeply troubling turn. He was actually well known to the Secret Service because of multiple prior attempts to breach the White House. This wasn't his first time showing up at the gates.
That's startling. What had he done before?
In June of last year, 2025, Best allegedly tried to block a vehicle from entering the complex. He was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility for evaluation after that. Then, in July of 2025, he was arrested trying to enter the grounds through an exit turnstile. During that encounter, he reportedly told officers he was, quote, Jesus Christ reincarnated, end quote, and said he specifically wanted to be arrested. So there was a documented pattern of behavior that suggested significant mental health distress.
And yet he was back at that checkpoint Saturday. How did that happen legally?
A judge had issued what's called a stay-away order, legally barring Best from the White House vicinity. At the time of Saturday's shooting, he was in clear violation of that order. In fact, a bench warrant had already been issued for his arrest because he failed to appear for related court hearings. So the system was aware of him, the courts were aware of him, but he still managed to get to that checkpoint with a revolver.
What about his views? Was this politically motivated?
That's still very much an open question. Friends of Best told WJZ in Baltimore that he was actually a supporter of President Trump and never expressed any animosity toward him. But his digital footprint is being scrubbed by the FBI right now. Fox 5 DC reports that investigators have found online posts where Best claimed to be the, quote, real Osama bin Laden, end quote, and made general threats. So far, though, no coherent political motive has been established.
Chloe, you mentioned this as part of a larger pattern. Tell us about the other incidents.
Yes, this is the third high-profile shooting involving the presidency or its immediate vicinity within just a single month, which is really extraordinary. FBI Director Kash Patel and U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro have publicly described it as a troubling pattern. On April 25th, a month and a day ago, a man named Cole Tomas Allen, 31, from California, was arrested after storming a checkpoint at the Washington Hilton during the White House Correspondents' Association dinner. Director Patel called that a calculated assassination attempt, noting Allen carried a manifesto detailing anti-government grievances.
And then there was a second incident before Saturday's, correct?
Correct. On May 4th, just 3 weeks ago, a 45-year-old man from Texas named Michael Marks fired at Secret Service agents near the Washington Monument along Vice President J.D. Vance's motorcade path. After his arrest, Marks reportedly made vulgar statements against the White House. So that's 3 separate major incidents in roughly 30 days, each involving a different suspect with a different background.
Are investigators saying these men were connected in any way?
Not so far. Director Patel and U.S. Attorney Pirro stated just yesterday, May 26th, that no formal operational link or conspiracy has been established between the 3 suspects. The current investigative thinking is that this is a cluster of lone wolf actors, either radicalized by the broader political climate or suffering from severe mental health crises. It's a distinction that really matters, both for prosecutors and for how the government responds.
Speaking of how the government responds, the administration is pointing to all this to push a major construction project, right?
Yes, and this is where the story gets politically charged. The Trump administration is using Saturday's shooting to amplify its push for what's being called the East Wing Modernization Project. This is a 90,000 square foot facility planned for the site of the original East Wing, which was demolished back in October of 2025. President Trump posted on Truth Social that these events prove the necessity of, quote, a hardened security structure, end quote. He describes the planned facility as a 6-story deep subterranean complex with a military hospital, command centers, and drone-proof roofing.
A 6-story deep bunker. And how is the administration trying to move that forward legally?
On May 25th, just yesterday, the Department of Justice filed a legal brief in D.C. District Court, labeling the Best shooting a, quote, targeted political assassination attempt, end quote. That language is designed to justify emergency funding and to bypass pending environmental and historical preservation lawsuits. The administration is also seeking $1 billion from Congress for these security upgrades. But Senate Republicans have struggled to authorize that money amid internal dissent and some rulings by the Senate parliamentarian.
I understand critics are pushing back on the timeline the administration is using. What's the discrepancy?
This is a key point raised by PBS and the Los Angeles Times. While the administration is now citing the 2026 shootings as the primary justification for this bunker, the planning and demolition actually began in mid-2025, long before any of these incidents took place. The original justifications back in early 2026 were much more mundane, things like mold and water leakage. So critics are arguing that the administration is retrofitting a security rationale onto a project that was already well underway for entirely different reasons.
And meanwhile, the investigation into Nasir Best himself continues.
It does, Grace. As of today, the FBI's Counterterrorism Division is still investigating whether Best's actions were the product of his well-documented delusions or a targeted political act, as the administration maintains. The ballistics question about that wounded bystander also remains open. So we're really looking at a story with 3 layers: the immediate violence, the mental health and legal failures that allowed Best to reach that checkpoint, and the political fight over what kind of fortress the White House should become.
Chloe, remarkable reporting on a deeply unsettling story. Thank you for walking us through it.
Thank you, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. On May 26, 2026, U.S. Central Command made a splash by conducting self-defense strikes against Iranian missile sites and naval vessels near Larak Island. These maneuvers were aimed at sinking alleged Iranian attempts to mine the Strait of Hormuz, occurring right in the middle of a fragile ceasefire that has been on ice since April 8th. While Secretary of State Marco Rubio claims a final peace deal remains within reach in Doha within just a few days, the Iranian Foreign Ministry is fuming, calling the attacks a grave violation. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and the Trump administration are still angling for the surrender of Iran's enriched uranium. But this latest round of combat is certainly fueling heated debates over global energy security and the proposed expansion of the Abraham Accords. Turning to a different kind of fever, health officials are struggling to contain an Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda. The situation has become infectious as community resistance leads to violent attacks on medical facilities, including a hospital in Mongwalu and a Doctors Without Borders tent. Trust has reached a breaking point, with cases of the rare Bundibugyo strain surging past 900 with at least 220 deaths. World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus warns the epidemic is running away from response teams. Because there is no approved vaccine for this specific version of the virus, containment is a tall order. To keep the virus from catching a flight, airports like Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson are stepping up their screening game to prevent the spread into Rwanda or South Sudan. Europe is currently feeling the burn as a record-shattering heat wave sweeps across the continent. At least 11 people have already lost their lives as the United Kingdom saw temperatures hit 35 degrees Celsius at Heathrow, breaking a record from 1922. It is a real scorcher in Spain, too, where Seville hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit, while French spokesperson Maud Brigiot confirmed 7 heat-related deaths. This heat dome is causing more than just sweat. Rail lines in London are seeing smoke on the tracks, and a grass fire even sparked at Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh. Climate scientists say this 1 in 1,000 event is a sign that the planet is starting to lose its cool. Back at home, the Democratic Party is finding itself in a bit of a trade-off over a proposed ban on congressional stock trading. Tensions are trading at an all-time high during a Texas runoff where Colin Allred and Representative Julie Johnson are at odds over past investments. While Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thinks some of these bills are just a scam, others are trying to bank on the Restore Trust in Congress Act. Even the Senate is betting against its own members, passing a ban on prediction market gambling, while Speaker Mike Johnson worries a total ban might discourage qualified people from seeking office. Finally, things are cooling off in Orange County, California, as officials lift evacuation orders for 34,000 residents. There was a real chance of a blast at the GKN Aerospace facility in Garden Grove, where a cracked tank of methyl methacrylate threatened to go boom. Thankfully, the pressure has been released, and internal temperatures dropped from 100 to 93 degrees. Governor Gavin Newsom declared a state of emergency, and while the immediate threat of a fireball has fizzled out, 16,000 people are still waiting for the green light to go home, as a federal lawsuit against the facility begins to take off. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.